All right, so I think we will let people in. It's 1:02. All right, well, welcome to our fourth session, and we welcome Darian Tong and Ross. Thank you for Redwood City for the sponsorship. We so appreciate it.
Thank you. I just am here to do a brief introduction, if that's okay.
Please.
Absolutely.
Great. So Derry and I have been working together in Redwood City on the financial programs at the Redwood City Public Library for some time. And they're wonderful programs. They've been very successful in helping people understand their financial futures and how they can become more active in planning their financial future. And what I love about these programs is they're not exclusive. In other words, everybody has a financial plan. It doesn't matter how much money you have, whether you have $1 or whether you have a lot more than that. It's still important to plan. And I want to just quickly promote 2 programs that are upcoming. One is a live program, and we just booked it. It's on Saturday, October 26th at the downtown library. We don't have a time for it yet, but we will. And I think it's going to be in the afternoon, but I don't know. But if you just put October 26th on your calendar, and then you'll pick a specific time on that day for you to have an individual session with one of the certified financial planners. And that's what's special about Financial Planning Day, is that you get your own financial planning appointment with a certified financial planner so that you can ask your own questions. And that's just such a wonderful opportunity to get a free session with a financial planner. And that's so valuable. And then the other upcoming program for May, I'm going to talk about Canopy, and that is how to do streaming with the library's free Canopy program. If you think streaming is just for people who pay for it, you're wrong. You have access to streaming video with your library card. So join me next month and I can tell you all about it. And I am really looking forward to this Will and Trust program today. I know we have a lot to learn from that. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Roz. Hi, everyone. My name is Darian Tung. Like Roz said, I guess there's 2 ways I should introduce myself. I run a wealth management practice in Redwood Shores with Ameriprise Financial. I've been running that practice for the last 21 years. But I'm also a member of the Financial Planning Association of Silicon Valley. And one of the big efforts that we have in our organization is to make sure that we're giving back to the local community. So I grew up in Mountain View. I was born in Stanford Hospital. I now live in Palo Alto. My kids go to school here, and I run my practice in Redwood City. So I very much have spent the majority of my life here on the peninsula. So when I found out that we had a pro bono committee at FPA, I jumped at the first chance of it because having 3 daughters and a wife, and try to run my own life too, not a lot of extra time on my hands, but volunteering and giving back to my community is really important. And so I couldn't think of any other better way than to try and lend my expertise when it's available. And I've built this fantastic partnership with Roz. And we through the library, we're starting to offer more programs. So like the Financial Planning Day that you mentioned, I'm the one that helps to run that. So I hope later this year, when you see the advertisement for that you'll come join us. But as far as what we want to accomplish with you today, the main thing is the title is Wills and Trusts, but I think I'm going to take a bigger step back with all of you and talk about estate planning as a whole. Because wills and trusts are one part of estate planning, but there's a broader aspect of this that I want to share with everybody. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and then we will start to go over a couple of topics that we'll have for the program. I think the best place for me to start in terms of how to think about estate planning, as you can see from the title, the key word there is control. That you see, plan for the future, how an estate plan helps you put you in control. I think that the most important part is the control aspect of things, because when it comes to our finances, we actually have more influence and control over it than we may initially think. So today's discussion is meant to help introduce you a little bit more to some of that. And the hope is that by the end of today, there's a couple of things that I always aim for whenever we provide these educational events. The first is you're coming in here because you probably have some questions and maybe there's a few things you're thinking about, or maybe you're even in the middle of a process like this. So my goal for today is very simple. It's two things. I want to try and answer some of those high level questions for you and have you leaving this session with a few new questions. If I do that, then we're moving in the right direction because this means forward progress as you continue to work on your finances. But the second thing, which maybe I would argue is more important, is I want you to walk away from here with 1 or 2 actionable items that you're going to do in the next 48 hours. And the reason why I'm this specific about the time frame and the number of things is any more than 2, we tend to not get it done. And then any more than 2 days, it tends not to get done quickly. So the hope is 2 things in the next 2 days that you can work on after coming out of this. So that's the goal. In terms of the framework for what we're going to talk through today, I want to introduce you to a broader concept first, and then we'll talk about how we go about talking through estate planning today. But the concept that I want everybody to get familiar with is what at Ameriprise we like to call the confident retirement approach. But it's basically a framework for thinking through retirement. And most of us, if we're starting to think about estate planning, we're either on the cusp of retirement or already there. So we like to think of retirement as sort of this building block process. And what we'll be spending our time on today is the top of the triangle, where you see the leaving a legacy component. But what I want to emphasize to you is if you are working on the legacy component of your financial plan, the hope is that you either already addressed or you're about to address the things underneath it. So that was the main message I wanted to deliver to you on the slide here. But it's just making sure you get a good understanding that while we're talking about estate planning, in a sense, what you're going to find after we get through today, what we're talking about is the leftovers of what you've done with your financial life. So the hope is that you're addressing the necessary steps to be able to have these leftovers to then pass forward to whoever it is that you want to pass it to. So let's jump into our agenda for today. There's a couple of topics that I wanted to make sure that we get to touch on today. And as we work through some of these, this is where I'm hoping to answer some of your basic questions and then also present you with new ones. And then I'll go through the slides and the information for about 20 minutes or so. And then there'll be a Q&A session where we can answer some of your questions, and then we'll wrap it up for the day. So as you can see from the topics that we have listed here, we're going to go from top to bottom, left to right. Yeah. So we'll talk about estate planning as a whole, who should be thinking about this at the moment, the basic components of your estate plan, and then the people you'll want to involve in the process. And then we'll spend some time touching on special considerations, and then also call it more complicated situations that we have to address. So let's start first with what is estate planning exactly? I think if we were to use really simplistic terms, the easy way to think about estate planning is it's making sure the things of value that you own at the moment go to the individuals or the institutions that you want it to go to. That would be probably the easiest way to explain it. But as you can see from the list of things that's showing up on your screen here, there are some very specific scenarios that estate planning is designed to address. So whether it's caring for children, whether it's addressing certain interventions, or whether it's ensuring distribution of our assets, estate planning covers all these things. So from a broad perspective, estate planning is meant to cover a lot of different scenarios. What we'll try to do today is give you a couple of concentrated areas to think about. And then what you're going to hear me tell you at the end is eventually you're going to have to sit down with either, if you have an advisor, then by all means, you're going to want to sit down with the advisor to talk through what you learned today. You may want to meet with an advisor if you don't have one. So we'll talk about how you do that. But ultimately, when it comes to estate planning, it's an estate planning attorney that you will sit down with when you're ready to draft these documents that we talk about today.
Great.
So let's.
Darian,
Yeah.
you're not sharing your screen.
Oh my gosh, I'm not. Hold on. Let's see. Sorry about that. Oh, okay. All right. So sorry about that. I didn't realize it hadn't shown up. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm going to back up really quick just so you can see a couple of things that we talked about here. So our agenda for today, you're seeing that up in front. So these are the different topics that we're going to cover for today. In terms of the way that we'll address it, something I should mention. We're going to go far and we're going to go wide, but we're not going to go very deep. The idea is to go shallow and just make sure that we're addressing a couple of basic things. And then the hope is that you'll follow up in one way, shape, or form to dive deeper into some of these topics. So in terms of addressing what estate planning is, I want to make sure you guys take a quick look at this screen before I move on to the next one. But like I mentioned before, it's either taking care of other individuals that are important to us that rely on our care, or taking care of us in certain cases, and then it's distributing our assets to the appropriate people. So let's talk first about what exactly qualifies as an estate. So what you're going to see show up on your screen here is a number of call it the most common items that fulfill your estate. So most of us will have retirement accounts, investment accounts, those kinds of things. Some of us will have life insurance policies. A lot of us on the call probably also own property of some sort. So those are the common things that you hear about. The one that you see in your upper right-hand corner is an area that's very encompassing in terms of a lot of different things fall under this category. The easiest way to think about heirlooms and personal property, anything that is of significant value that you want to pass forward, that you don't want to just throw out at the end of the day. So this could be artwork, it could be collections that you have, it could be jewelry, obviously, with that picture showing, but anything that you determine that is of significant value that has some sort of not just emotional value, but also financial value. And this is what your estate is designed to address. If we think about how your estate is calculated, the formula that you see coming up towards the bottom of your screen is pretty straightforward. Populating it is what's kind of complicated, right? Because sometimes not everything has a stated value. Like our accounts have a statement and says, here's how much money it's worth. There are other things that we own where it's not quite so easy to determine, or maybe it's somewhat subjective. So we want to just be sensitive to that and say there's a process that you go through to value those things. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you think of a fire sale of your estate. If you have to sell everything today, we determine what that value is, and then we take away anything that's a liability or a deduction. So liability, think of debts, so mortgages, credit card debts, auto loans, or deductions, where there may be things that, while they're of a certain value today, over time they lose value, and that's considered a deduction. And then you have your taxable estate. So we'll talk a little bit more about what that taxable estate means, but let's start first with who this might be appropriate for. Most of you on the call, I'm going to assume you're here because you already started to look into this, but just in case, if this is your first time through, easiest way to think about, is an estate plan appropriate for me? There's three sort of categories that I like to think about when it comes into this. One is, there's anybody who's dependent upon my care if I'm no longer around. So when I die, does somebody still need support? If that's true, then estate planning is a conversation you want to have. If you have assets left over of any sort, estate planning in different forms will be appropriate. Maybe not exactly what we talk about today, but you do still want to think about who's going to get this and how do I make sure I get it to them? And we'll talk a little bit about that today. The third is, if there is something specific with you that needs to be addressed, whether you anticipate requiring some sort of care, but if there's something specific to you where you're going to need somebody else to assist you, then estate planning also falls into that category. For the most part, if one of those things is true, then you're going to want to take this conversation a little bit further than what we're doing today. But I think a good place for us to start is by addressing some fundamental documents, because documents are what actually make up or what defines your estate plan. So we're going to jump into that. If we think about fundamentals of estate planning, mechanically, I like to think about it as a series of documents that makes up the body of your estate plan. So the documents that you're seeing listed here on your screen, we're going to start at the bottom and work our way up to the top. But the easy way to think about these documents is that they each have a specific purpose in your estate, and all together they are designed to address not only personal wishes or requests that you have, but also the individuals that we care about that might need care on our part or when we're not here. These documents will address all of that. So we're going to, like I said, we're going to start at the bottom. We're going to work our way up to the top. What exactly is a will? A will spells out who's supposed to get what. And the idea behind that is very simply, if you were to take inventory of your estate, you're saying, grandson gets this, uncle gets that, right? You name those different people, a friend of yours gets a certain thing, but you're specifying individuals who are supposed to receive certain things from your estate. The other is to address guardianship. If we have minor children, grandchildren, or extended family that we're taking care of, that they might still need some additional support if we're no longer here, it's addressing it for them. And then it's also addressing specific wishes that we have on our own part, and then also addressing certain individuals that are going to have to do this for us. Because in all likelihood, if this document is being let's call it implemented or executed upon, it's because we can't do it ourselves, and we're probably close to the point where someone's going to have to do it for us. I think an easy way to think of this from the other perspective is, if you don't have one, here's what happens. If, assuming most of us on the call here are from California, but this is true if you're in any other state, if you die without any specific documentation about what's supposed to happen to your estate, then the state you live in will decide that for you. I don't think I'm saying anything shocking when I tell you you don't want that. You want to make sure that you're the one that's deciding where things go and what happens, primarily for two reasons. One, obviously, if someone else is deciding this for you, it may not go the way you want it to, and certain people that you want to get certain things aren't going to get it. But more importantly, the process that the state goes through to distribute your estate is both time consuming and expensive. And very simply, if you do some work ahead of time to prepare the necessary documents and address your estate now, you'll never have to, you and whoever helps you with selling your estate will never have to see a courtroom. And that's one of the goals behind our conversation today, is if we can help you in a process where you never have to go through what's called probate court, then we've already accomplished something if we can do that for today. So take it on, I guess you have to take my word for it. I hope you never see probate court. There's nothing fun about it, and there's all sorts of inefficiencies and you name it that are just wrong with the way the whole system works. So if nothing else, hopefully today I'll help you avoid that. Let's talk a little bit about beneficiary designations. Very simply, beneficiary designations are your determining people ahead of time on who's going to get certain things from you. So with some of the examples you see here on the screen, retirement accounts are probably one of the most common that you will deal with this. And this is IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, anything that starts with a 4, basically. But when you look at how these kinds of accounts work, most of them are set up in such a way where you as the owner then decide who gets your things or who gets the value of this account at some point in time in the future. We always recommend, when you designate beneficiaries, and this is true for life insurance policies, brokerage accounts, the property and business ownership is the one area here in the middle that goes a little differently, right? Because there's other governing documents for property and business ownership, but the concept is still the same. It's making sure that not only do you designate who should get your things, but that you also designate a backup, or what we call a successor or secondary beneficiary. Because unfortunately, there is the possibility that while we designate one person to get our things or multiple people to get our things, some of them may predecease us. And then if they're not there, we're in that same situation where the court is going to then have to decide it for you. So at a minimum, you want 2 levels, as we like to call it, of beneficiaries: primary, secondary. If you really want to be thorough, you'll come up with a 3rd level, a tertiary level, of making sure you've got 1, 2, 3 for each of these. And then the likelihood of there not being anybody left after you're gone is very low at that point. Durable power of attorney. You've probably heard about this in a variety of different shapes and sizes, but it's a fairly simple document. So if you've heard a variety of different things and it sounds confusing, my goal today is to simplify that for you. Think of durable power of attorney as somebody who's going to make financial decisions on your behalf when you're no longer able to. So if you're incapacitated for whatever reason, this individual is then responsible for making those financial decisions for you. This could be things like paying bills. This could be managing investments. This could be distributing assets to certain people if they need it. But the idea is, if it has to do with money, this is the individual who makes that decision on your behalf when you're no longer able to. There are 2 types primarily. There's a variety of permutations here, but there's basically 2 types of power of attorneys. One is what's called a springing power of attorney, meaning that it springs into action when it's needed. So when you designate somebody as your POA, as we like to call it for short, that person isn't necessarily going to act on your behalf right away. The springing component of it says when you're no longer able, this individual comes into play. Just like I told you before, and I'll basically call this a rule throughout the rest of our conversation today, secondary individual is important here as well. If the first person, for whatever reason, is not available, make sure you have a backup. But the other kind of power of attorney is essentially an immediate power of attorney, means that as soon as you put this document in place with your institution, this individual is in play as a role that they're going to take care of for you. Take the same concept for a financial power of attorney and apply the same thing to the healthcare power of attorney, which is sometimes also called a medical directive. The difference between your financial power of attorney and your medical power of attorney, in terms of documentation, your power of attorney document sometimes has to be filled out individually for every institution that you go to. So whether it's your bank, whether it's your investment firm, or you name it, you may have to go through this process with each of them. What we always recommend, just so it saves you a little bit of time, when you sit down with an attorney to draft this document, or if you choose to do this yourself, you can go to somewhere like Nolo Press or LegalZoom, or I think it's willandtrust.com is the website. If you go to any of those places to design it yourself, you have to make sure you're presenting it to these institutions to make sure that they are aware of it, and then they'll take you through whatever their process is to get it established. With a healthcare power of attorney or a medical directive, you usually can get this document from your local hospital. So wherever you go for your healthcare, if you ask them, do you have a medical directive form? Almost all of them will have it. Or if they don't have it right there, they'll tell you where to go get it. That one is a different process because you're going to fill out a variety of things from medical interventions to life support to all the things you can think of. But the concept is the same. You're still designating an individual to make healthcare decisions on your behalf in the event that you're unable to. This could be surgery. This could be a number of different things. The nice part about these documents is you can be very specific. So I'll give you a very quick example. One of the things that I have designated in my medical directive is if I'm on life support and you're talking through the different interventions that you're considering for me, if it does not improve my quality of life, or if after you exercise these things, I'm still just plugged into a machine and I'm not really living, then unplug me and let me go. So that's one of the things that you can say in your medical directive is to say, I need a certain quality of life if you're going to do whatever you're going to do. Otherwise, let me go. And this, if most of you on the call you probably remember the name Terry Shiva. There was this case, I want to say it goes back to the late 90s, early 2000s, of this woman who was in a coma. The husband wanted to let her go, so take her off life support. The parents didn't want that because understandably, who wants to do that to their child? And this went on for a really long time. The reason you know about that story is because there was no medical directive. So if you have this, you take the burden off of your loved ones and anybody else who might have to make this decision on your behalf and say, oh, if this is the situation, Darian specifically said in this document, do this. And now there's all the other things that everyone else has to worry about. This will not be one of them. So while this sounds like just one document in the list of things, there was quite literally a dominating news story for, I want to say it went on for over a year because this one document was missing. So as important as each one of these documents are, I will say as we all get older, because as one of the things that we study all the time in my line of work is the fact that longevity is increasing in most cases. And that adds to it a number of complexities from a medical perspective. And then therefore it makes it more financially complicated. But this document in and of itself circumvents, or I guess you could say gets you around a lot of potential complexities. So really important to have these in place. And again, I'll repeat it. Primary, secondary, have a backup just in case that other individual either isn't there or if they predecease you. Let's talk really quickly about one other thing. Relative to the living will, which also known as the medical directive, you can also determine a number of things in terms of the measures that are taken on your behalf. Now, measures are difficult to quantify from a medical perspective. What I would recommend is if you're not entirely sure, if you have certain ideas that aren't totally clear, your doctor is a great person to have this conversation with. So hopefully you're going for your regular annual checkups, but next time you see your doctor, if you're in the middle of this process, have some time and sit with them and just say, hey, I'm working on putting this together. Can we talk really quickly about what this entails? And just as importantly, ask your doctor, what have you seen? And what do you recommend that I consider doing? I can't think of a better person that has good perspective on this. It's someone who knows your health history, knows your situation, hopefully knows you pretty well, and then can give you their take on it. That's a conversation that's certainly worth having. So last couple of things in terms of, before we wrap up and get to Q&A, I want you to think really quickly about how you're going to manage this, because it's one thing to put it together. It's another to make sure that you're telling the people who are going to be involved, which we're going to talk about that in the next slide, telling the people who are going to be involved with you what their responsibility is and what you're expecting from them, and then also making sure that they have these documents as well. So if you already have these documents in place, good job. Make sure that the people that you've designated in here have a copy of this and they know where to get it. And then make sure you're having a conversation with everybody. If it's been a while since you've done this, let's say you've done this 15, 20 years ago, there's some people on the call where this is probably the case. It's a good time to have an update with both the attorney because laws have changed, but also going back to these individuals. And then maybe even when you go back and review this, maybe you don't want all these people doing this anymore. And maybe you want to change it. Maybe kids are older now and then they can play these roles. So the updates are also going to be really important if you've already gone through this process. But I really want to emphasize the importance of making sure your documents are accessible and that the people that you want to play these roles for you that we're about to talk about, that they also have a copy of this as well. Let's talk about the roles that you're gonna choose to play in your estate plan. I think that the easiest way to think about this is these are individuals who you trust to make decisions on your behalf, or in a manner of speaking, they know you well enough to make the decisions that you would make if this were up to you. Couple professionals that we start with, and then a few other individuals that you'll think about. First off is your attorney, right? Like I mentioned at the beginning of the call, the attorney is the one who drafts these documents for you. So it's important to, once you know generally what direction you're heading in with your estate, make an appointment first. That's the very first step here. Some of us may be on this step right now, so I want to touch this for a little bit. If you have the contact information of the attorney and you haven't made the appointment, and you either have been kind of dancing in limbo with this, make the appointment, right? We all do better with deadlines. So set the appointment, and then this will naturally drive the process because now you have a deadline to work with. But what also happens is the attorney will send you a questionnaire to fill out, and you got to prep that for that first meeting. So if you're at this step where you got the information and you just haven't gotten going, make the appointment. That's an easy thing to do, and then that'll naturally help move things along. And then again, when you sit with the attorney, they'll take you through these scenarios and they'll walk through the documentation with you, and then they'll help you put all of this into place. Your tax advisor is the other individual that's going to play a role here, because the easy way to think about this is the majority of the financial decisions that we make is going to have some sort of taxable consequence. And who better to talk to about this, assuming that we have a accountant, CPA, some sort of tax professional. After as you go through this estate planning process, it's good to involve your tax advisor and just say, hey, here's what I'm doing. They might have some additional advice or some guidance for you along with this. And just as important, it's good to make sure you make them aware that you're doing this, because they'll support it as well. And maybe they can even provide some support along the way in the process. The next two roles we put together, but the reason for that is because your trustee is the individual who makes decisions relative to the trust document that you're going to put together. And the trust document, just so that we can touch a little bit on this, it's connected to your will, right? They come together. That's why you always hear will and trust and will as a phrase together. The reason is because the trust is the document that serves as the ownership of things. So as an example, for those of us who own a house, if you have a trust document, the house should probably be in the trust, because houses don't come with beneficiary designations, but trusts do. So if the trust owns your house, then you know where the house is going, or you can designate where the house is going when we're no longer here. So the trustee is there to make call it administrative decisions and manage the administration of the trust. The executor, though, is connected to this in the sense that per the phrase or the term, they execute on the wishes in the will in the trust. Oftentimes, this could be the same person. That's totally fine. But sometimes they're separate. So if you choose to have them be the same person, that's probably a good idea, mainly because these two have to work together. So you can give it to the same person to do it. If they are two different people, make sure they know about each other, make sure they get along. The last individual that kind of comes into play here, before I skip ahead here, the last individual that you see at the bottom is your financial advisor. While I think that the advisor ends up playing a more dominant role in this entire framework, because when it comes to financial advice, this is an ongoing thing. Whereas for taxes, it's like a once a year thing. For the estate plan, it's hopefully once every 10 years that you do this. So you're going to see your advisor hopefully more often than once a year. So as a result, your advisor also needs to be aware of what's happening, and in a lot of cases can actually guide you through this process. So important thing to mention before we skip on to this. Complicated estate planning. There's a couple of things that I think is worth addressing. Some of that falls into these categories that you're seeing here, but there's a few others that I'll touch on very quickly. Blended families is probably the most common, what you would consider to be, not just off the shelf kind of a situation. But if you take a look at the listing of things that are here, the other thing that I think you want to get a feel for is if you have any situation that's somewhat non-traditional, meaning that it doesn't just fit nice and neat into the basic estate planning box, then you fall into the more complex category. This is, again, where depending on what that level of complexity is, you'll probably need to involve more individuals. So the professionals that you saw on the previous slide, you're maybe having more conversations with them in order to get to where you need to. But what I want to address, the other thing I want to address here is when you talk about longevity with clients, especially if it's couples, but just generally speaking, we all know women live longer than men. And if you are married or if you were married, widowers are common in my line of work anyway, because the older we get, the men tend to die off first in most cases. So there's a specific, call it, level of responsibility and complexity that comes when you're the last one standing. And that's a conversation where if that, that's your situation, that's going to be your situation, or if that's already the situation you're in, you want to have targeted conversations around this and just say, hey, it's just me now. There's a number of things I need to think about in terms of making sure I've got the appropriate level of care, that I've thought through the appropriate risks that are coming my way. Because unfortunately, what often happens is there's either one person who's responsible for the finances for the couple, or we're each sort of dividing and conquering the role. But it's unfortunately rare that we plan far enough ahead to transfer the role to the surviving individual. So this is, again, a very nuanced conversation, but one that I think is important to have. So let's talk really quickly about some numbers, and then we'll start to wrap up here. Exemptions and exclusions. This used to be a more complicated slide. There used to be all these different little portions of the table. Now it's become more straightforward. For this year, you can pass forward a little bit over 13.5 million from your estate before you are subject to this estate tax rate that can climb as high as 40%. So the easy way to think about this slide, even though there's a lot of information here, 18,000 a year, you can give to anybody. So you can give to however many individuals you want. So if you want to give it to 10 people, 20 people, totally up to you. Your limit is 18,000 per person. And when you take, let's say, like a college plan, you can actually multiply that by 5. So you can put 5 years of gifting into a college plan if that's what we're thinking about. But the important thing to remember is if we're gifting less than 18, then you give how you want. There's no taxable consequences. There's no forms that we have to fill out. But the moment that we need to go above that and we're transferring, let's say, assets or something like that, then some additional forms have to be filled out to address it. And then you have to start keeping score, in a sense, of how much am I deducting from this 13.5 million that I'm allowed to give today. For the next year, or I'm sorry, the next 2 years, this year, next year, that number is going to continue to climb. In 26, it's stated to expire or sunset, as we call it. And then it's going to be roughly cut in half from the number that you're seeing right now. We'll have to wait and see, because it's up to the next president and the next Congress to decide whether or not they keep things going or whether they make the adjustment. But just know that these are your limits for now. Giving gifts that I just mentioned before, the easy thing to think about here is there a reason that you have where you have excess savings, excess assets that you want to give to somebody else? That's the triggering conversation, right? Is I have this, I would like to give it to these people. How do I do that? And then whether it's the accountant, the attorney, or your financial advisor, or all three, those are the people that you're going to pose that question to, and then you're going to design a conversation around that. So last thing to talk about, so I kind of got to the punchline here with the trust document, but as a quick reminder, the important thing to remember about how trust documents work, and there's a variety of trusts. We're gonna touch on a few of them, but the important thing to remember about a trust document is its job is to own things. That's primarily what it's for. And like I mentioned at the earlier part of our discussion today, it's designed to help you avoid probate court. If we can structure things in such a way where you don't have to ever see that, then we've done our job. But a couple of things. The most common document you're going to see is what's called a revocable living trust. Revocable being the key word there, meaning that you can change it. And you can change the people that are involved in it. You can change the beneficiaries. Just about the entire document is editable, let's call it. Irrevocable is similar, but in this case, there's an example of an insurance trust. But irrevocable essentially means that once you put it in place, it's hard to change it. You can make some changes, but it's limited. Insurance policies are commonly what are put into irrevocable trusts because it takes it outside your estate. So this is an example of that. Another one that I think is worth just you're being aware of. Again, I wanted to go over a broad level of topics here. For those of us who are charitably inclined, again, accountant, estate planning attorney, a financial advisor, whoever you have immediate contact with, if you are charitably inclined, it's worth your having this conversation of, hey, what sort of charitable giving strategies are there that I should be considering to try and maximize my gift and maximize my impact to the purposes, the causes, the organizations that I want to support. But part of the reason that the estate planning discussion is important to have here is because there may also be tax benefits for you that you can only take advantage of through a process like this. So if you are somebody who's regularly gifting, and let's say those gifts start to exceed, let's call it $10,000 a year, then you're going to want to start initiating this conversation with one of your professionals to say, hey, what else should I be thinking of here? So the last slide I wanted to leave you with is a concept that I think helps drive home some of the things that we've been talking about here, which is at the end of the day, there's really three ways to leave a legacy. You can leave it to family and friends. There's charity that can be involved, but if you don't address those top two properly, it's going to go to the one at the bottom, which will be taxes, or basically to the government. So I think what's really important for you to keep in mind here is make sure that we're addressing the first two. If there's no one else, we're nowhere else for it to go to, whatever, obviously the government's happy to take your money. But if we have people or causes that are important to us, this conversation we had today is one that I hope in the next 2 days that you'll at least take the next step to get that moving, because as we get older, and something I see all the time, what we leave behind in the form of a legacy becomes of ever-growing importance. And this is one of the ways that you can start that process if you haven't. And like I mentioned earlier, if you've already done it, maybe we need an update. But my hope is that, again, we went really far, really wide today, but hopefully this has been informative for you. I want to thank everybody for your time. There's a lot of different ways you could have spent this last hour or so. I appreciate you coming in here to learn a few things with me. I'll leave my contact information up here, because if you have questions or if you have anything that you need, I'm a big fan of answering questions. I think it's important. So easiest way to get a hold of me is probably email. That's because nowadays I have to be in a bunch of different places. So email is easily the way to get your question out to me. But if you have any questions, if you have anything else that we can help you with, then please reach out. We're happy to talk with you. But I want to open it up to Q&A. So if there's any immediate questions that anybody has, please let us know.
Darian, there's a couple questions on the chat.
Okay.
It says, can you explain the 10K charity a year? What if my husband and I disagree? I'm sure that happens a lot.
Yeah, that's common. That's common. So the reason why I say 10,000 is because when we start to get above that level, that's when it basically becomes worth it to consider other forms of giving besides just directly giving it to somebody, and directly, like, let's say, writing a check to an individual or to an institution. So roughly around that range is where it's worth the trouble, let's call it, to do something beyond that. If you disagree, that is more of a reason to have this conversation, because oftentimes the disagreement is just the need for whether it be like a moderator or somebody else to just bounce these ideas off of. So disagreements are normal. I think what's important is just making sure that we get each side of the conversation or everybody's wishes on the table, and that you're talking with a qualified individual who can then take that and say, okay, I get what you want to do. Let's consider these.
So Sandy also asked, I think when you explain 10K, she asked why? Is there a tax benefit if you were to give more than 10K? I would assume that's the question.
Yeah. Call 10,000 sort of like the easy number to remember. That's why I use it. There isn't a sort of specific tax threshold or anything like that 10,000 refers to. It just has to do with when I look at the cases that we address most of the time, when we start to talk with clients about, hey, have you considered these other ways of gifting or these other strategies of gifting? It tends to be at amounts higher than that, because anything less than that, the deduction you can get is also lower, and that again sometimes doesn't make it worth it. And then in terms of the way the tax laws currently work, anything significantly less than 10,000, it really limits your ability to do certain things. So it's typically at that number or higher is when it's worth the conversation. So the phrase I always like to use is worth the trouble. But typically below that, if you're just giving straight to the institution or whoever, that's totally fine.
Okay. There's others. Will you say more about charitable giving as part of the trust?
Yeah. So I think the easiest way to at least point you in the right direction. There's going to be organizations or causes that you're interested in supporting, and you may want to increase what you're giving to support them, but you're not exactly sure how much you can part with. Is one of the most common conversations we have. Or also, you're just not aware, are there other ways that I could support this? So charitable trusts are extremely powerful in the sense that they maximize what I like to consider the win-win scenario. What it does is if it gets to that point, and I should be very clear here. When we start talking about charitable trusts, we're talking about larger sums of money, right? So we're usually talking about something like $250,000 or more is what we're starting to think about, meaning that this is the amount that we ultimately want to give, and we don't need to live on it. So what's really important as you have this conversation, how much do I need to live on right now? And how much can I just say is excess? That excess is where this conversation comes into play. You don't want to have that conversation with what you need to live on. But charitable trusts allow you to do things like give a certain amount now and then wait until I die to give the rest, as a good example. But while it's the institution has to wait until you're passing before the rest of your estate passes on to them, you as the donor get to take tax advantages today. You get tax shelters today for that. So that's where the charitable trusts are really powerful. But again, has to be the conversation has to be had around which one, because there's a variety of types. And then also just determining whether or not that's your best approach. That's just one of the ideas that you can utilize. But if you think about charitable giving strategies, charitable trusts are one of the most common ones that get exercised. So that's why I wanted to mention that today. So if that somehow piques your interest, then whoever the professional is that you're working with, start that conversation and let's see where that takes you.
Thank you. There's another question. Do you need both a will and a living trust if all you own is a piece of property?
No, you don't. You just need a trust. If you just have the trust, what you do is you draft it, and then in the trust, you're going to say who gets the share of your house, or however many people gets the share of your house. And then the two important steps after that. Once you build the trust, you're not done. You have to do what's called fund the trust. So the trust document, like I mentioned before, is designed to own things, but you have to give it to the trust in order to own it. So when you draft the document, it's just this open box. You got to put something in the box. So what you do is you change the title of your house. Right now, it's probably in your name or the name of the people who own the house. It then shifts the ownership to the trust. The other important second step that I wish more people mention this because it's important. You then have to go to your homeowner's insurance policy provider and tell them the trust now owns the house. Because from an insurance perspective, that is considered a change of ownership. And if you were to have a claim and it's still you that owns the house and they find out it's a trust, we've seen insurance companies deny your claim, even though there's every reason for them to fulfill it. So fund your trust, update your homeowner's insurance policy. But if the main asset you own is a property, a trust is all you need.
Okay, thank you. Two more questions. How much to create a trust? And then Ross have a question. You may want an advanced directive living trust to specify your medical risks, right? Shouldn't everybody have one?
I think most people should have a medical directive. Let me answer that first. The statistics that we get that you see as far as healthcare needs as we age, that number just goes higher and higher all the time. So all of us, I think, should have a medical directive, regardless of age. If you're healthy as a horse, that's fantastic. That's good. We want that. But at some point in time, your health is going to decline. And we all have heard the stories where so-and-so was healthy and then all of a sudden something terrible happened. So all of us, yes, should have a medical directive. How much does it cost? The range is anywhere from a majority of the investment of your time, because if you can build it yourself, again, there's LegalZoom, there's NoLoPress, there's willandtrust.com. You can build your own that way. Cost is a couple $100, I think, if you go through any one of those sites. The biggest cost is your time. You have to take the time to go through it. So it's sort of like, do I hire an accountant or do I do TurboTax? It's the same kind of concept. Either one is fine. It's just which one you're comfortable with. But if we hire an attorney, on the low end, I've seen that cost be $3,200. On the high end, it's gotten as high as like $15,000, just depending on the level of complexity. So pretty wide range. But if you have, let's call it a standard estate, meaning, one nuclear family, there's no blending. We own a house, we own a couple assets, then usually you should expect that cost to range anywhere between like $3,000 to $5,000.
Great. One more. Oh, two more. Is the medical directive the same as POLST? Physician order for life-sustaining treatment?
Oh, that's, I guess the best way to think about it is that that directive, the POLST, that is a subset of the medical directive. One of the things that the medical directive talks about is life-sustaining treatment and what sort of interventions there. Medical directive is broader, right? You may say there's certain surgeries, there's certain procedures I don't want done or I do want done. It's a broad, it's more encompassing. So the POLST is a subset of that.
Got it. Another question, last question. If kids are adults, does the money still go to the state first?
If there is no document to say that things go to the kids, this is the call it the frustrating part. You go to probate court just so that they can tell you it goes to your kids. That's effectively what happens. So this is why we say put the documents in place, then you avoid that whole process.
Okay. So basically get your trust done.
Yeah, pretty much. Do get the documents in place, then you solve a lot of these potential issues.
One more. Oh, go
I-
ahead.
I asked a question, if you do have a living trust, what is it that you should have that then you begin to think about also having a will?
The will, I like to think about the will as the document to speak for things that don't have titling. So think of heirlooms, think of collections, think of jewelry, those kinds of things where you don't have an account statement and, you know, ownership titling. It's those things that can't be spoken for in terms of titling. That's what the will is mainly designed to accomplish, is the things that don't go into an account effectively. That's what the will is for.
So that would be gold, jewelry.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Those kinds of, yeah, collectibles, anything of significant value that doesn't have a, this is owned by so-and-so and this is who's going to get it. Those kinds of things are where we want to make sure that the will speaks to that.
And if you wanted to leave small amount of cash to people who've been your assistants through your life, does that have to go in the trust or in the will? And we're not talking large amounts of money.
Yeah. So you can put it in the will. You absolutely can. I personally think that should go in the trust though, because the trust is unquestionably the document that everybody recognizes. Wills technically can be contested, right? Not to say that someone would contest a few $1,000s or small sum of money, but the trust is just, it's unquestionable at that point. So put it in both is probably the best way to do it, but a will technically gets it done.
Thanks.
My pleasure.
Anyone else?
I just wanted to say thank you so much, and I love that your list of difficult situations has pretty much everything in my life. And it includes a situation that I just went through, which is
Ooh.
the courts with my family. So
Yeah.
really do have your documents done, because these things really happen, and it's like avoid it if you possibly can.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
it's not something that you can predict happening. It really can happen. So just think of it as a kindness that you can do for your family.
I love
And
that.
Darian, thank you so much.
My
I see-
pleasure.
I
My
see
pleasure.
I see two statements that haven't been answered. One is, can you just write down your wishes on a piece of paper? And then something else about CEPs.
Yeah. So like so you, I guess you could technically write it on a piece of paper, but it would have to be notarized, right? So that's one of the last steps that make these documents what they are, is you end up notarizing them.
There's one more question. CFPs can't create trusts. Only trust attorneys can do that, correct? And what
That is
are the
correct.
possible sources of fiduciary?
Yeah, so yeah, CFPs, we can't create the trust documents, but we guide everyone to that process. Fiduciaries are either professionals or they're like your attorney that follow through on that.
Great. Well, thank you. We're actually 5 minutes over and we appreciate it. It seems like everybody want more information. We will have to have you back again, Darian.
Happy to be back. I appreciate everybody coming to this. Again, I hope this was a good use of your last hour or so. And yeah, we'll hope to see you on here again soon.
Great. Thank you so much. Take care.
Take care, everyone.